Germany and Ukraine reach deal for long-range weapons production. Berlin agrees to help finance construction in Ukraine of weapons that can strike targets inside Russia. Ukraine and Germany have agreed to future military cooperation in which Berlin will help finance long-range weapons production on Ukrainian soil. The deal came as Zelensky warned that Russia had amassed 50,000 troops in the Sumy region bordering Russia, where Vladimir Putin has declared an intention to establish a buffer zone. Friedrich Merz, the German chancellor, said the weapons would be produced in a Kiev-Berlin collaboration. Our defense ministers will sign a memorandum of understanding today regarding the procurement of Ukrainian-manufactured long-range weapon systems, Merz told a press conference. There will be no range restrictions, allowing Ukraine to fully defend itself, even against military targets outside its own territory. The pact was forged as Zelensky arrived in Berlin in search of more support after Russian attacks intensified, and amid evidence that Moscow was planning a broad summer offensive. It was his third visit to the German capital since the start of the full-scale invasion in 2022, and his first since Merz entered office. Merz avoided commenting on speculation as to whether Germany would deploy Taurus missiles, which was prompted by his pronouncement that range restrictions were no longer in place, enabling Kiev to strike Russian military targets over the border. Neither leader would detail the specific weapons that would be manufactured in Ukraine, saying it was prudent to keep the information as secretive as possible. Zelensky said he expected the first weapons to be ready by June 2026. The expectation is that Berlin will supply Ukraine with the technical components to build and maintain its own long-range weaponry, including rockets and cruise missiles, with a range of up to 2,500 kilometers. This could enable Kyiv to better defend itself, and also save Berlin from accusations, at home in particular, that it is a warmonger, helping to place-hate skeptics within elements of Merz's government who fear Germany being dragged into a wider-scale conflict. The two leaders said they believed all the stops had been pulled out to solve the conflict through diplomatic means, repeatedly emphasizing their conviction that the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, was not interested in ending the bloodshed. But they said they would continue to pursue a negotiated peace, referring to possible talks in Geneva. Germany has long supported Kyiv and is the second biggest deliverer of weapons after the U.S., but relations between Zelensky and Merz's predecessor, Olaf Scholz, often felt decidedly cool, and Kyiv was evidently repeatedly frustrated by the speed of Berlin's decisions. Merz said while in opposition that he would back Ukraine in office, and Wednesday's meeting was noticeably warmer and less tense than those between Scholz and Zelensky. The two leaders used the informal version of "you" to address each other, as well as referring to each other by their first names. When Zelensky's microphone appeared not to be connected to the in-house interpreter, Merz quipped, "German technology," and laid a supportive hand on the Ukrainian president's arm. As well as focusing on Germany's continued support for Ukraine, the visit was also expected to be used to discuss efforts to bring about a ceasefire in the conflict that has run for 3.5 years, the German government spokesperson Stefan Cornelius said earlier in the day. Almost immediately on entering office earlier this month, Merz took a train to Kyiv with his French and British counterparts, Emmanuel Macron and Keir Starmer, as a sign of their solidarity towards Zelensky. He greeted Zelensky on Wednesday in a rainy Berlin with a military parade outside the Chancellery building. After meeting German business leaders and leading parliamentarians, Zelensky will spend the night in Berlin. He and Merz are then due to travel to the western German city of Aachen on Thursday, where the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen is to receive a prize. Starmer is also due to attend, and the four leaders are expected to hold further talks there. Before the Berlin encounter, Russia's foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, called Merz's recent plans to build the strongest conventional army in Europe very worrying. Speaking at a security conference in Moscow, Lavrov said the announcement was reminiscent of the periods of the previous century, when Germany twice became the leading military power and how much trouble this brought. There has been heightened speculation that MERS will promise to deliver longer-ranged weapons systems to Ukraine, such as Taurus missiles, after he said on Monday there were no longer any range restrictions on the weapons Germany sends to Kyiv to defend itself against Russia. However, the German government has since sought to clarify its position, saying these range restrictions had already been lifted. MERS is expected to offer his Ukrainian counterpart a multi-billion-euro package, including additional air defense capabilities, more weapons, and financial aid with which Ukraine can buy U.S. military equipment. It is unclear whether the package will be in addition to the 3 billion euros, £2.5 billion, in aid already agreed in March by the outgoing government. There are also expectations that a longer-term approach to helping Ukraine will be adopted. This would probably include Berlin supplying Ukraine with the technical components necessary to build and maintain its own long-range weaponry, including rockets and cruise missiles. This would enable Kyiv to defend itself more effectively without Berlin having to be concerned about being labeled a warmonger. This in turn would make support for Ukraine more palatable to MERS's domestic audience, among whom there is concern about Germany being dragged into a wider-scale conflict. The German chancellor's drive to keep a campaign pledge of more robust backing for Ukraine is running into blocks within his own government as he prepares to welcome Volodymyr Zelensky to Berlin. Friedrich Merz made a full-throated declaration on Monday, hours before Zelensky's one-day visit was announced, that Germany was for the first time lifting previous range restrictions on weapons supplied to Kyiv, along with Ukraine's other main Western supporters. His statement, in an interview with a public broadcaster which his team later posted to social media, was widely interpreted as a pivot toward bolstering Berlin's aid to Kyiv at a time of devastating aerial bombardment by Russia. It drew immediate condemnation from Moscow and invited speculation it could be a prelude to Germany announcing it was sending long-requested Taurus missiles to Ukraine, possibly as soon as at the Zelensky talks on Wednesday. However, on Tuesday, Merz of the Christian Democratic Union appeared to finesse his message as he faced criticism from his coalition partners, the center-left Social Democrats. Far from a groundbreaking new policy, Merz said permission for Ukraine to strike military targets inside Russian territory using weapons supplied by Western allies had been granted previously after an extensive debate. Hence, yesterday in Berlin, I was describing something that already happened months ago, he said. Ukraine already fired British-made Storm Shadow missiles into Russia last November, as well as French Scalps and U.S. ATACMS. Germany has delivered only 2 weapon systems to Ukraine that could be used to attack Russian positions beyond the border, Mars 2 rocket launchers and PZH-2000, a self-propelled howitzer. Range restrictions on both were lifted in May 2024. The Kremlin had said on Monday that any new decision to scrap range limits was quite dangerous, and contrary to our efforts to reach a political settlement. Merz's initial comments also drew criticism from leading Social Democrats. MP Ralph Stegner, an SPD foreign policy expert and frequent critic of arms shipments to Ukraine, called the comments not helpful and wrong, and demanded redoubled diplomatic efforts. Vice Chancellor Lars Klingbeil of the Social Democrats insisted there was no new agreement that goes beyond what the previous government did on range restrictions. The Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, used the confusion over Merz's initial remarks to question the caliber of people who had risen to power in leading European countries, Reuters reported. Merz said yesterday with such pretentiousness that from now on and forever, there are no restrictions on the range of strikes. Before placing the policy in context, Lavrov told reporters at a meeting in Moscow with the Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan about Donald Trump's comment that Vladimir Putin had gone absolutely crazy with the latest attack. Lavrov said that the U.S. president was showing emotion as he was watching his efforts for peace in Ukraine sabotaged by European politicians. In what Ukraine called a weekend of terror, Russia battered Kyiv over 3 nights with massive air attacks, fueling calls from Western partners for an immediate ceasefire. However, Merz said on Tuesday that a halt to the fighting appeared far out of reach, despite Russian and Ukrainian officials holding direct talks for the first time in 3 years earlier this month.